Coogs house. Okay, yes, Houston did take care of business in non-conference play with a huge win over A&M Corpus Christi, but they also stumbled into something that they need to dive a little further into.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater can step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. I'm recording from a basement of sorts. It is Christmas holidays. More on that later. But as it is Christmas holidays, tell us now down below if you enjoy the conversation, but you don't know what to say. What is on your Christmas wish list or whatever wish list for the Houston Cougars? Now, we've got a lot to talk about today. I want to do a little bit of history reflection on the Fertitta Center. I'm going to talk about a type of layup I noticed and I really liked a lot in this one. Before we get too far, I do want to start off by talking about the four-guard lineup that Houston went with to start the game against A&M Corpus Christi and how that can translate into something much better for them. Now, for starters, we should open with Joan Roberts is fine. He's resting an injury he suffered in the previous game against Toledo. It sounds like had it been a more contested game, he would have played and suited up. He was practicing throughout the week, apparently on Twitter, is what it looks like, just resting the injury. And instead of going with JoJo Tugler and Javier Francis, two starting big men, they went with just JoJo Tugler and started Terrence Arsenault. Weird to think that's just Terrence Arsenault's second start of his career. I could go on and on about that, but it is. And what you saw in this four-guard lineup was a lot of space, paint touches, kick-out threes, and the speed of the game was a whole lot more intense. A lot of people, it looked like on Twitter, were talking about how much more aggressive they played and aggression, and it's like they just had more space to show off their speed advantages in this one. Now, and I know Houston's not going to have a speed advantage like this in every single game they play, but they clearly do in this one. For what it's worth, they're going to have them in a lot of games that they play, and this is a moment for them really to utilize that speed and frankly create that space. The paint touches, patience lets it kick out threes. That's why you open up with a couple threes, start the game. I mean, the floor had so much more space on it. Ultimately, it was interesting to see the way that they shifted lineups back and forth. You saw Malik, Uzan, Cryer lineup all together out there, and that was at one point you kind of thought each of those three guys could be a backup point, or could be a point guard or a backup point guard. They all played together a lot. You saw Francis and Tugler out there together as soon as the first media timeout happened. Murphy Miller came in at the U12 timeout. That was much faster than he typically plays. Sedlot played first half minutes. Probably had more to do with Roberts being out, right? But you see a lot of stretches throughout the game with different looking lineups. And by far and away, the most effective, as it has been for a couple games now, was this four-guard look around any big, obviously, but JoJo Tugler's tenacity, intensity, relentlessness, etc. Insert stat of your choice really paved the way and made a big difference and made it you're able to play that kind of lineup with him. I wonder if the four-guard lineup that they've got out there with Arsenault, Uzan, Cryer, and Sharp is the four-guard you'd go with. You're obviously giving up some size, and I think the big detractor to this was that they were giving up rebounding advantages. They actually were losing the rebounding battle at halftime and only won the overall rebounding battle by 2 rebounds. And A&M Corpus Christi, had to write this down and be sure I was right here, but they're horrible at rebounding in general. They're 123rd in the country in offensive rebound percentage and 336th in the country, 336th in the country in defensive rebounding percentage. And for a large chunk of the game, they were out rebounding Kelvin Sampson's Houston Cougars, which doesn't seem realistic or possible. But what I do think it tells you, right, is that Houston was finding ways to make up for it on offense. The offense of this game, obviously, A&M Corpus Christi is not the defensive juggernaut that you might see in other teams in the Big 12. It's certainly not Auburn or Alabama or anything like that from the earlier parts of your schedule. But you did have in your starting lineup from behind the arc, Uzan was 2 for 2, Arsenault was 3 of 6, Sharp was 3 of 5, LJ Cryer 5 of 7. Now, I'm not a great mathematician, but that's what, 13 out of 6 and 5 is 11, 7 is 18, 20. 13 out of 20 is pretty darn good for behind the arc from your starting 4 guards, right? Or 4 perimeter type guys. And that, again, space and pace with it. You can attack the lane because there's wider gaps. That pulls in more help side for kick out threes and that kind of thing, right? I think this lineup is impactful because of the versatility of Terrence Arsenault, right? He can guard 4s. He can guard 3s. He's got the length. I think I saw a 6'8" wingspan, right, to play with guys from a lot of different spots, even if he is more of a true 6'5" or so himself. And then you also have like the muscle you've got of Emmanuel Sharp. He's got a lot of a lot of strength to him, a lot of wingspan as well. And so he can help guard some of those bigger, small forward types along the perimeter. That's kind of been his starting role for 2 years now, right, doing that kind of a thing. Undervalued part of this, though, I think, is also that Miles Uzan's a large point guard at 6'4" himself. That obviously keeps your average height fairly high. And frankly, the only undersized guy you're playing on the floor once you sacrifice that you're playing a small 4 then becomes LJ Cryer. Then you factor in that Emmanuel Sharp's throwing his body around after every rebound, and Terrence Arsenault is getting after it defensively, and he didn't get a rebound his first couple stints in the game, I guess, but he's doing a lot of other poking of the ball and this kind of stuff. And then you end up going with JoJo Tugler, who seems to just never run out, the Energizer Bunny of this team. It really did feel like they were able to make up for a lot of the size difference and rebounding difference with other ways. Now, they won't be able to do that against everyone, obviously, but I do think what we see from this 4-guard lineup is you're able to – I think you've established that you've got to run this for stretches of the game every game, right? And it might not be with JoJo. It might be with Jawan or Javier. And it might not be with those same 4 guards. You might put Malik out there because he rebounds extremely well, or Mercy when his offensive game is really firing, or something like that, right? But I do think that these guys, or Ramon Walker, right? I guess we let him off because when he comes back in a few weeks, I do think you've established that this lineup has to see the floor in basketball games because they have the capability in offense to really just blow the doors off of whomever with the space and the shooting and all that kind of stuff. It's not unlike, and I know this is going to be a big comparison, but the very first Warriors team in this latest iteration that won it all, right? They had the death lineup where they put Draymond Green at the center, Iggy at the power forward, and just run. And they didn't do that all the time. People remember that team for being that space and pace, small ball basketball team, Charlotte threes, Steph Curry and stuff like that. They didn't do that all the time, but they did do it for large chunks of the game. And then if it was a game that they had an advantage with it, they'd end the game with it, right? They'd close the game with it. It feels similar in that for Houston, that they have clear advantages against a lot of teams that they'll play with this lineup. And if they can keep using key spots, and then obviously for other parts of the game using more traditional 2-big lineup. The Warriors did that back then with the guy. Was that when Lee was on the team? Anyway, that's the kind of way you kind of get more crux of traditional basketball flow. You got to have your different kind of punches if you're a boxer and that kind of stuff, right? It's a way to change up the game. And I can go back and find the clips on it, but we were talking about this several games ago. Houston went with it for a big chunk of this game, and it clearly worked. I think that ultimately it's the kind of thing that Kelvin Sampson and company need to kind of hold on to. Now, I want to talk about one thing I noticed in watching this game as well. Replacing the irreplaceable is a daunting task. And I think that Houston's got an idea of an option. But before we get to that, our buddies over at Rocket Money are here to help you. And I don't know if you've ever gone through and found too many subscriptions on your phone or too many things you didn't even know you're subscribed to. And Rocket Money app is here to help you with those kinds of problems. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and help you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place. It's really easy, whether it's subscriptions or your spending habits or even whatever goals you've got to set for the year as we enter a new year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved over 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, I subscribe to a lot of things to try and get a quick deal, whatever. And the best feature was the subscription tracker. I used to cancel a handful of services I wasn't using anymore. They've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, being able to automatically set aside money for the future, setting some big things up for 2025. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked on today. Parker Ainsworth is Locked On Coogs here, talking about Houston's big win and some stuff that they could figure out and pull out of that one going into conference play later this month. Now, Houston did win 87-51. To stress that A&M Corpus Christi is not like the juggernaut of a team they'll play later this year or anything like that, right? And I would also point out that A&M Corpus Christi, for what it's worth, is a really strong offensive team that Houston held to just 51 points, and they're averaging just over 80 points. But they also are a bad rebounding team and kind of kept that part of the game competitive with Houston. But one thing I think that they can pull out of this game, and it almost got lost in the course of the game, is finding ways to use Emmanuel Sharp in spots that a year ago they used Jamal Shed, right? Now, Jamal Shed is truly irreplaceable in an individual kind of standpoint, right? I mean, his jersey needs to be in the banners. He was a first-team All-American, Naismith Player of the Year candidate, Defense Player of the Year. National Defense Player of the Year and different awardings, and Big 12 Player of the Year, Big 12 Defense Player of the Year. He's the list of things on his resume goes on and on and on, right? But we also remember, last year, he had a pretty good non-conference slate, and then they kind of figured out what they need to do with him. Honestly, probably in those losses early in the conference slate they had against TCU and Iowa State, and he took off and took this team to another level, right? And ultimately, his injury in the Sweet 16 game is what ended the season. I know effectively they played another 30 minutes or whatever, but that was it. And Emmanuel is not necessarily going to become a first-team All-American by the end of the season. Now, I think he's really good. I don't mean to say it's never in his future, but that's a big jump to get where he is now to that. But he, after, in this game, got hurt in the first half. He actually, after making a three, I thought he stepped on a foot on the bench of a bench player from A&M Corpus Christi trying to get back down the floor. But I guess it looked like on replay he might have just rolled his ankle and stepped wrong. I don't know. He did come back and play. He's going to be fine. It's just rolled ankle. It happens all the time. But in this game, he was 9 of 9 from the foul line. And perhaps more importantly, he was aggressive and attacked the rim, had 2 other attempts at the rim that missed, but were a lot of contact, heavy, whatever, right? And I think that aggressive Emmanuel Sharp can kind of do something that Jamal Shed has done did for the previous 2 years when Houston got in a bind offensively. When Houston got in a bind offensively, Jamal would get the ball, top the key in the slot. And we used to always joke about in this show that he'd run HB dive, like he'd run a Madden and just downhill at the basket. I'm faster than you are. I'm more aggressive. I'm strong. I'm getting to the rim. You're going to foul me. I'm going to shoot a layup. Well, those 2 options here, right? And admittedly, Jamal Shed was a much better passer. And so if they doubled out of it, he could kick and find guys open, him in the pocket and whatever. But Emmanuel's got the size and strength to do that. he also, for what it's worth, whether it's positive or negative, has the reckless abandon with his body to do that. And if you're going to see him get to the line 9, 10 times a game, that feels Jamal Shead-like as well. Now, for all the things that, we said that Jamal Shead did better, and he scored a lot more points per game in conference play last year than Emmanuel did. He scored a lot more points per game in non-conference play last year than Emmanuel has this year, right? His 2-point field goal percentage is Jamal's was much higher, right? The thing that Emmanuel adds is he's shooting over 49% from behind the arc this year and shooting over 5.5 threes per game, right? For those of you that are new to basketball, maybe you're more a football guy, maybe you're getting into college sport, that's unheard of. That's ridiculously high percentages and volume to keep up that percentage from three-point range, right? That's the kind of thing that like analytics nerds are drooling over, to put it nicely. I mean, that's truly special and remarkable. For what it's worth, that's 10 percentage points higher on his three-point percentage than it did last year with about the same volume. And as far as like this Jamal Shead comparison goes, it's nearly 20% higher than the best season Jamal Shead ever had from behind the arc, right? And so having that added into his repertoire, I'm not saying it makes up for it always, but it certainly does elevate his game in a different way where he can use that weapon to his advantage when the defense is playing him, because Jamal Shead was running this downhill attack at the basket that we're talking about without defenses respecting his three-point jump shot as well, right? If Emmanuel gets the ball on the three-point line and he has a hesitation dribble or a catch-and-shoot pump fake moment, defenses have to assume he's shooting a three and contest it, because if he shoots a three, it's a 50-50 shot that thing goes in, right? And threes are worth more than two. They got to live with that, right? And that's going to open up more of his attack in the basket, more of this getting to the rim, more of this getting to the foul line. And he's a 91% free throw shooter, which is also better than Jamal Shead was in the free throw line on shooting about 8.5 attempts, right? So more of these getting to the foul line, attack the rim kind of moments from him are going to be really, really important. He's got the strength to take the contact at the rim. He frankly is pretty crafty with his finishes. He doesn't quite elevate like Jamal did, but he certainly, he's a sturdier guy and a taller guy. I think he takes the contact a little bit better. I think that while it's impossible to replace everything Jamal did, and we're not trying to replace everything that Jamal did in this comparison, watching Emmanuel get downhill in this A&M Corpus Christi game, I had like an aha moment where I was like, that's what they were missing. Because last year against Texas, last year against Kansas, last year against whomever you want to talk about them playing last season, when it was time to get a basket, Texas Tech, BYU, whatever, right? It all started by saying, all right, Jamal, you're going to attack the basket and they're not going to be able to stay in front of you. And we're going to figure the rest out after that, right? And I don't mean to say that he can do everything, but I think Emmanuel can do that part of this. And, I'm not saying that we need to call a bunch of Emmanuel Sharp isolation plays in the first 10 Big 12 games and see how it goes. I'm not saying you put it all on his shoulders, and I don't know if that's even fair to ask one guy to do what Jamal Shead did. I'd argue it wasn't fair last year. They had to, and he did it, right? But I do think that in looking at what Emmanuel does well, if they can continue to push, hey, I need you to do this, right? I don't need you to do it 10 times a game, but I need like 3 or 4 of this, like when offense is hitting a dry spell, and there were dry spells in this A&M Corpus Christi game. There was a 5-minute stretch without a field goal made. There was another 3-minute stretch where they didn't make a basket of any kind. That's 8 minutes of a 40-minute game where there weren't a whole lot of points being scored by Houston. Cut those minutes in half, right? Cut those minutes down by saying, all right, Emmanuel, your world, rock with it, attack the rim, right? Not catch and shoot, attack the rim, get us some points. Let's get this thing going back on track, right? I think that he is showing that he's able and capable of doing that. And I think that that's, I don't want to say an untapped part of his game, but I think it's one that they don't fall back on hard enough. maybe. And I think that's something that Houston's got that they haven't used yet. And like we saw last year, we saw a big jump in Jamal's play from non-conference to conference play, right? Frankly, the year before, we saw a big jump in Jarris Walker's play from non-conference to conference play, right? I think you're seeing a lot of development of Sampson, and I point out how Sampson uses freshmen differently as conference play goes on than he does in the non-conference games when talking about Mercy or whatever, right? I think you can see the same kind of push with Emmanuel here. And I know that's asking a lot potentially, but I think there's something to be said about that. Now, they did also pass a big milestone over the weekend at Fertitta Center, and I don't want to just gloss over that. I want to take a minute to be a history teacher and talk about that for a second. But before we get to that, it is today's show brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the NFL playoffs are almost here. My fantasy football playoffs are not going well, but they are here. The NFL playoffs almost here. It's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. They've upped the ante here. Again, $250 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. FanDuel has so many ways to get in on the action when you pick up W. I like betting on which players are going to score a touchdown, just anytime touchdowns, that kind of stuff. How many points your team will score. I like to see touchdowns. I like to find teams I think will score a lot of points. It makes it a lot more fun that way. You go and find your action. I like to see the Texans score a lot of points. So even with Tank Dell and that gruesome injury being out, I think I'm going to keep going with the Texans scoring a lot of points. See CJ Stroud figure some of this out, and maybe Bobby Slowick figure something out, or them figure something out in place of Bobby Slowick. But that's not here or there. That's just FanDuel.com. Go to FanDuel.com, join today. FanDuel.com for your chances at $250 back in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Parker Ainsworth is locked on Coogs here, talking about Houston's big, decisive win over A&M Corpus Christi over the weekend, 87-51, wire-to-wire victory. The first, the most recent of like 5 or 6, I think they said on the telecast, wire-to-wire wins for the Houston Cougars in a row. And not that I have a digital drum roll here, but it was the 100th victory at the Fertitta Center, right? And I think that number makes sense for anyone who's watched it unfold, the way this program has grown in the last dozen years. But truthfully, I don't want to just move past that too much or too quickly, or as we go into a little bit of a break here between the A&M Corpus game and the Oklahoma State game. I think that offers a great moment to pause and look back at it. So, I don't know that I even realized that. I guess the first, renovation for Hawthines was proposed in 2010, and they raised, I think it was $40 million or something for it. And in the process of figuring out how to renovate Hawthines, they got to realizing that was not going to be quite enough. And then in 2015, the board approved a complete redesign and raised another, I think it was $60 million, and over 20 of it was from Tillman. And they create this great design, and they have this intimate approach to having, only about 7,000 people inside, and just having a raucous 7,000 instead of having the gargantuan 12 or something like that, where people are too far away to see it. They want everyone to be able to have great view of great basketball. And they start working the project, and the Cougars have to go play next door at Texas Southern for a season and stuff. It goes all kinds of different ways. And then ultimately they open up the stadium in December of 2018. I think it's number 18 Oregon. I mean, Bol Bol was on that team. Peyton Pritchard, Boston Celtic, on that team. Oregon was number 18 team in America, top 20 team in America. Really, really good Oregon team. Again, a couple pros on it, right? Houston, that was the Galen Robinson, Corey Davis, Armani Brooks. Nate Hinton was a younger guy on that team. I think if I remember right, he actually really breaks out the next year, but he's on that team. Fabian White's a young guy on that team. And Fabian was like a lot of energy and he played a lot as a sophomore that year. I think a sophomore that year. I don't think he was a freshman. I think he was a sophomore that year. A lot of energy that out of that group, and frankly, like really fed into what the crowd was giving them that game. The game is still on YouTube. It's kind of a crazy watch. I can't like watching. It's like hard to believe. Like this is Houston Cougar basketball in so many ways, but also it's so different. Like anyway, just a whole different thing that like kind of like because the evolution was so progressive that when you go back and watch it, just cut and dry, changing from 2024 back to 2018, even December of 2018, it's like whoa, this is such a different product on the basketball court. And not to say those guys weren't good. I mean, Armani has been in the NBA. Galen's in the NBA with the Pelicans organization. Corey Davis is playing somewhere overseas right now. I believe I saw. I believe he's still playing. These guys were pro basketball players. I don't mean to say that. It was just fascinating to watch. Like some things are still the same. They push the ball off the court and they're shooting threes in the break. The first basket in the stadium, or first basket in Fertitta officially, right, was an Armani Brooks 3-pointer on a fast break transition move, right? And for what it's worth, he also had the second Houston Cougar shot of the game. Anyway, just like big deal, right? And that year's team got the Sweet 16, and frankly, probably should have beat Kentucky in the Sweet 16 that year. Tyler Hero, it might have been like 20 seconds left. I forget how many seconds, but Tyler Hero hits the gutting three. I probably should look that up, but Tyler Hero knocks Houston out of the tournament that year. That Kentucky team that Houston lost to by, I think it was ultimately 4, but they lost to like as Hero and PJ Washington and some guys that would be in the NBA, are still in the NBA today. Took them to the wire. They should probably, again, like probably should have won that game, but definitely like showed the country kind of what Houston Cougars basketball was about at that point. Really killer way in the season, in which again they open up the Fertitta Center that December, and it's only taken until December of 2024 to get to 100 wins in that building, and that's kind of crazy. They're 106 all time in the Fertitta Center, and for what it's worth, after that opening game against Oregon, their next 2 games were against a Southland Conference Lamar team. Houston just played a Southland Conference A&M Corpus Christi team. That part I had to look up to be sure. But then the 2 games later, playing Oklahoma State at Oklahoma State. Well, Houston's next game is at Oklahoma State, and I was kind of remember the Oklahoma State game. I had to go back and double check. The Southland Conference thing kind of threw me a little bit. But if you go back to the poetry of it, like they opened the stadium with a win. 2 games later, they're winning at Oklahoma State and kind of shocking the world again. That week and some change, they beat a top 20 Oregon team and a Big 12 team. Now, they're no longer that like upstart American Athletic Conference, plays really hard and gives you everything you can handle kind of program. They're a team expected to win all of these games. Back then, it was nice to be a Southland Conference team by 15 or 20 points. Now we're sitting here criticizing when they win by 36, 37, right? Like that's a big deal. Look, I understand that you're 100 wins into the building, and in a few days you're going to Oklahoma State for the same kind of thing, except now you're the heavy favorite, right? I guess odds aren't out yet on FanDuel. I guess I'm just assuming they'll be the heavy favorite. Kim Pom had them as a 88% likely to win by more than a dozen points, right? I mean, that's pretty decisively a favor on the road. And it can be easy to just kind of gloss over winning 100 games at Fertitta and make it feel trivial or small or whatever. But I encourage you to go back and like watch where the program was in December of 2018 and how like kind of like while they were really good, again, those guys are now pro basketball players still, many of them, like how different things were. Like it was like, oh my gosh, Houston can beat these guys. Now it's like, yeah, Houston needs to beat all these guys. And that change, that shift, it's because those players that were on the team in 2018. It's because the coaching staff coming in years before that. It's because of all, but it's also just this incredible growth of a program to watch over time. And I don't want to take those kind of things for granted as this goes. And I hope you take a moment or took a moment to pause and think about that as well. If you've been to Fertitta Center and have a fun memory you want to throw in the chat below, feel free to do that as well. Breaking it down, Big 12 basketball play coming up at the end of the week. Here's the schedule for the week as we get out of here. Obviously, this is out today. Tuesday, the 24th, we are having a Big 12 squad drop, I believe. I recorded that on Sunday, so I believe it's dropping Tuesday. 25th, 26th, we're off. I got ideas on stuff to drop on the 27th, 8th, 9th, and 30th. Then we'll take a couple of days off for New Year's and hit it after that, right? So we're going to be spending that time in between, getting ready for Big 12 basketball. If any big transfer portal news happens in between there, obviously we'll have to hit that as well. Frankly, if something really big happens in transfer portal, maybe we'll have to hit it in an unplanned show, right? But all that and more coming at you each day here at Locked On Coogs. So hit subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. Locked On Coogs, the primary of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Go Coogs.